I do want to just note before we get going how thrilled I am to be here with Alex, but also how grateful I am for Jorge and the work that he and the people at the Vancouver Public Library have done to make these public-facing events a priority in this city. We have a lot of people who are very into themselves in Vancouver, you might have noticed. And at the Vancouver Public Library, these events bring a range of different people into rooms together to share and learn and grow and sort of come up with some common purpose, whether that's reading an amazing book, which all of you should read, and you should buy multiple copies. This is a book for our times. I found it a really steadying force as I read it over these last few weeks. So I'm really grateful for it. But please support the Vancouver Public Library and all public libraries and all Canadian institutions that support the arts while you're at it. Okay? Thank you very much. Okay, sir. Away we go. You walked in last night. I had the privilege of being at the York Theatre over on Commercial Drive, full house in the evening. I see one of my students here, so my heart just skipped a beat. You walked in last night wearing an olive green, sharp suit. You had your notes in hand. You stood there with your Madonna microphone at the podium, and you paused. You took a moment, you surveyed, you started at the beginning and you moved through the audience and you looked up to the balcony and you came back down and you centered yourself, you exhaled, and then you began. What were you thinking about?
That's incredible that you noticed that. You're a journalist, you're perceptive. It really was a moment, and I had exactly the same feeling because the week before we had the first lecture in Toronto. And there is something incredible about walking out onto a stage to share a message such as the one in this book and realize how many people are there to share in it. And that they're there for, I think, some of the reasons you were just talking about why the programming matters so much here. This is a time when we want and need to be together and with each other and having conversations and grounding ourselves with each other and reaching out to each other. And I think in both of those moments, I was sensing that in the hall in Toronto and in the theater here in Vancouver. And I guess maybe kind of drawing on it to a certain degree before beginning the actual lecture. It's such a time, and there's so much in that energy.
You write a lot about we the peoples in this book, this idea of us coming together to intervene and understand what's happening in this moment. I'd love you to talk to me a little bit about how you're trying to make sense of what's going on right now.
Well, I'll pick up first on that language of we the peoples because it does appear throughout the book, and it was actually quite a significant theme of last night's lecture in particular. In very formal terms, that language comes from it's the very opening of the UN Charter, which many people will likely know is about to mark its 80th anniversary next month. And I've always been struck by the fact that this very formal, very important legal document, in many respects one of the most consequential legal documents in our world, and any of you who have poured through some of the provisions will know that a lot of what is in there is very legalistic and technical. But those opening words to me are like oratory, and it's so unlike what we usually see in other international treaties, which begin with much more stilted, legalistic, and frankly pretty dull opening language. But the sense of we the peoples, it almost kind of makes you want to get out of your seat and be part of something, lift your arms up into the sky. And I think that's always mattered, but does that ever matter right now, as you're saying, this world in which it is so difficult to find our way, it is so easy to feel completely off balance and lost. That's probably the most benign way to describe it, but even fearful and anguished about, not just about what the future holds, but even, is there a future when you throw the devastation of the climate crisis into the mix? And so what a time to come back to really grounding ourselves again in that recognition of our power and our responsibility. And that's what this whole international order that has been constructed over the last 80 years was premised on, that it is us who hold the power, it is us who are setting the expectations, and it is us who are going to deliver that promise in the end. So that's, I think, what I hold on to in terms of trying not to completely lose it as everything goes completely haywire around us.
Lose it or shut it out.
Yeah,
those
that's
are the
both.
poles that people are reaching for.
No, and that's a very, very good point, yeah. It's about just sort of reconnecting with each other.
This book is called Universal: Renewing Human Rights in a Fractured World. How did the book come to be? Was this kind of a, you retire and you decide you're going to write your magnum opus, or what was going on for you?
It was a very innocuous email from a producer at CBC with CBC Ideas. Someone I've known off and on over the years, certainly in the days that I was at Amnesty International. From time to time, I did collaborate with Ideas on various documentaries, but hadn't been in touch with anyone in quite some time. And I get an email that says, "Hey, Alex, it's been a while. Working on a project. Thought you might find it interesting. Could we talk?" Now, would anyone in this room get that email and think, they want me? My time has come. It's the Masseys. You know, you and I were joking. I'm sure there's others in the room who have a long history of working in civil society groups or, grassroots organizations, et cetera. And we often have this saying about civil society free labor. And that's actually what went through my mind. Not in I was more than delighted to take the call, but, was assuming it was simply, wanting to pick my brain on something or see if I had any contacts for a documentary they were working on. And instead, when we finally sat down to have the Zoom call, this is what he asked of me. And I guess
What do you mean, this is what he asked of me? He invited you to be the Massey Lecturer. This is a big deal.
It is. And I was immediately struck by that. I think we all often, in a very kind of offhand way, use the phrase, "I was speechless." But I'm sure everyone has had a few times in your life where you actually were. And I was. I just hadn't seen it coming at all. But then as it did settle, I was just so both overwhelmed but lifted up by what a gift and an opportunity, but also a responsibility it was at any time. But such a responsibility at this time, such a fraught time, with such a sense of despair out there in the air, to have this opportunity to engage in these kinds of conversations about something so consequential.
When you came back down to earth and realized, I've just said yes and I'm going to do this thing, was there a unifying thought that struck you right away? Or how did you come to this approach that you've taken?
It's interesting that the unifying theme of universal was still probably a few months down the road, and that really was a collaborative. I've been able, what a gift of working with incredible colleagues, in particular with CBC Ideas. The Ideas team is stupendous, and then the publisher as well, House of Anansi. So that was a real sort of brainstorming kind of collaborative venture, which brought us to that as the one organizing word, and I can say a little bit about what was behind that in a minute. But I think from the outset I was just so focused on wanting to convey a sense through this that human rights are not only, aspirational, lofty, hopeful, visionary stuff. They are. There is something beautiful and poetic in what human rights offer us, but that I really wanted to remind us this is about solutions. This is concrete. This is real, and it's possible. It's doable, even though we're still falling far, far short of what has been promised. So I think that's what really got me going at the beginning.
That now explains why you use the verb renewing in the subtitle.
Yeah, and I because I didn't want to I certainly don't, and I think this comes through very clearly. There are people in social justice and human rights space who I have very kind of lively conversations with who are really kind of moving away from, it was a great idea, but 80 years on, look where we're at. Clearly didn't work. Let's come up with something else. I don't know what that something else is meant to be. But for me, it's, this was, and still is, so right, so true, so genuine. And it's not something, and this is, of course, what last night's lecture was really exploring.
The history.
It's not something that just came out of nowhere in 1948 when the Universal Declaration was adopted. This is grounded in spirituality and philosophy and rebellion and revolutions and indigenous teachings that go back not just decades or centuries, but millennia. And I think it's really important to constantly remind ourselves of that. So yes, what I want us to explore is renewal. The promise is the right promise. It's the necessary promise. It is a doable promise. But we're way off track. So yes, let's renew our commitment to the promise, our understanding of the promise, but I guess most significantly, our efforts to realize the promise.
Right. You did choose the title universal as opposed to you, because you could have done it as a finger-pointing exercise to get everybody picking it up, kind of looking in the mirror at what they could do. Why did you choose that word?
To me, universal conveyed two sides of what I think we so profoundly need to grapple with when it comes to human rights in our world right now. The first is the majesty and the beauty of what universal conveys, that sense of it being something all-encompassing, about all of us, applying at all times, applying in all places. In the preface of the book, I had a real opportunity to just kind of reflect upon what is this word and what does it convey and what does it mean.
Do you want to read this first paragraph? It's beautiful.
Universal. We hear the word and immediately feel something all-encompassing and all-embracing, something that is for everyone and applies everywhere. It is a word of many moods. At times, it shouts to us with passion and confidence. For when universal is on display, it is magnificent. But in other moments, it speaks quietly and tentatively, with hopefulness, but also anxious hesitation. We declare and embrace universality as the tie that binds us, but we also reluctantly admit that its full extent has eluded us. And when we are honest with ourselves, we acknowledge that universality is far too often deliberately betrayed. And I think it's that last piece of betrayal that is the other side that really drew me to wanting to use this as the word. That it yes, conveys, the why and the what and the possibility and the hope and the necessity of human rights in our world. But it also very cruelly reminds us of all the ways in which we sell each other and others short. We are betraying the promise in fundamental, disgraceful ways. So it, I think, forces us to look at both sides of where we're at when it comes to human rights.
Have you been able to make sense of how we got to be in a state that we're in currently? Everywhere you look around the world, there's something going on that is disorienting and unbelievable. How are you working through trying to make sense of what's going on?
If only. Because, one wonders really if there is sense to be made of it. But I think there's two things in terms of unpacking that. One is we should remind ourselves that we have always fallen short. It's not only in these very desperate times that suddenly the Human Rights Project has suddenly gone off the cliff. It has constantly been strained and challenged, and there's been some very, very dark moments. Asterisk, though, footnote, and an important one, there have also been magnificent moments, absolutely stupendous change and progress over these 80 years as well. If there was a a mathematical, quantifiable way of taking the world in 1948 or 1945, let's go back to the charter, and today, 80 years later in 2025, there would be a very notable graph, charting up. That said, though, all along that way, we could put in the through lines that remind us of exactly the opposite, the horrific moments like the Rwandan genocide, for instance, to name a very obvious one. So it's always been there, but there is clearly something about these times. The rise of authoritarianism, the rise of disinformation, hate, and lies, the pernicious impact of social media, the polarization, I think there's a profoundly important connection. Any of you who followed or even heard or saw last year's Massey Lectures may recall that it was organized around, I've got one word, universal. Ian Williams had one word, conversation, and really picking up on the fact that we don't know how to do it anymore. We've lost, in some instances, it seems like we've even lost the interest in being able to have conversation with each other, but we've certainly lost the tools and the capacity to have, especially the difficult conversations, which I think feeds into this as well. So that's just amplified everything so dramatically. And it's why I think, and it's maybe a simplistic thing to be putting out there, but I think it's so profoundly important, that in that context, what we need to renew, what we need to remind ourselves of is, go back to those three words, we the peoples. It's really claiming or reclaiming, reaffirming the power that we have to be the agents that pierce through all of that ugly polarization and take us back down the avenue of universal human rights that we started on 80 years ago.
Right. I'm going to ask you to read from the book, but before we get there, I'm holding the book facing out because it's such a beautiful cover page. The art is magnificent. You were skeptical that they'd be able to find art to capture the meaning that you were trying to make in this book. What were you thinking about?
Well, any of you who are sort of regularly, sort of in human rights work or advocacy, or I think even more broadly in a lot of social justice initiatives, will know that imagery is not always easy, and it's so easy to get imagery wrong. And so when I was having the initial conversations with the publisher about the cover, which of course for them was hugely important, it was like, yeah, we know you're writing a book, but we need a cover, and we need a cover now. And because it's evocative, it's what is the front-facing aspect of the book, etc. And so we had a really interesting meeting where we talked about three options. One is that they could go with an iconic or interesting photograph of some kind and build the cover around that. The second was images, images, or the third would be just to simply use the title itself. Maybe some sort of big and evocative way in which the word universal would dominate the cover. And I remember saying in that initial conversation, feeling quite smug and certain about this, having been down the road several times and a couple of instances getting a bit burned by, whether in my amnesty days or other times, us getting it wrong. When it comes
sensational, too heroic,
too savior, not representative enough. And those of us in human rights world, we're hypercritical. We're advocates. We're looking for what to pick apart and complain, and we're very, very capable of doing that with ourselves as well. So I was sure that we were going to land with a cover that was all about, and I even kind of had an image of what the word universal, how it might break down, and bright colors, and I am not the least bit artistic. I don't even know why I had any opinion on this. But they proved me wrong. When I saw the first, it did go through some changes from the first version, but this is more or less what they shared initially, and I think it really captures it.
Yeah. It's probably one of the reasons why it's up on number 2 on the bestsellers list already.
Yes,
It
we'll
just
give
came
it to
out,
them.
so congratulations.
Thank you.
Can we give our audience the gift of your reading?
Mm-hmm.
Would you like me to hold the microphone for you so you can dive right in? I'm happy to.
Let's
Or
see if
can you manage it?
I think I can manage,
Okay.
yeah.
This is chapter 4, and it was interesting. This is the choice that Alex made, the choice that the producer made, and the choice that I made all separately, thinking, wouldn't it be nice for him to read this? Because this chapter just leveled me. So this is chapter 4. It's called Small Places Close to Home, Human Rights Made Real.
So this is when I say I changed my mind. I'm going to read from chapter 2.
Go ahead. That's totally fine.
So let me begin with, and the chapter begins with these words, before I get to the story that Kathryn has in mind. These are words from Eleanor Roosevelt, and this kind of set things up. Eleanor Roosevelt, as some of you may know, actually played a very, very central role in bringing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights into our lives. She served as the first chair of the newly established, in those days, UN Commission on Human Rights, and it was that commission that was charged with the responsibility of drafting and negotiating this grand new document, the Universal Declaration. And at a conference about 10 years afterwards, marking, I guess, the 10th anniversary of the Declaration, she had this to say: "Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places, close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any map of the world." So hold those words as I share this story with you. One person, one name. I learned that from the people of Jorlo. In 2006, as genocidal violence in Sudan's Darfur region spilled into neighboring Chad, I spent several weeks with an Amnesty International research team traveling along the Chadian side of that troubled border, documenting the impact of a string of brutal attacks against isolated villages that had left a macabre trail of death, destruction, and fear. This part of eastern Chad is arid and barren, with rocky, hard-packed earth, shifting sands, gnarled trees, and scrappy bush. It was the peak of the dry season, and only the widest and deepest stream beds had the occasional puddle with a few drops of water left. One afternoon, we came upon the smoldering ruins of the village of Jorlo. There was no one there. The silence was eerie, broken only by our hushed voices, camera clicks as we took photos, pen scratches in our notebooks, and soft footsteps as we moved along the village's dry, craggy paths. Not even the often cacophonous braying, bleating, or clucking of donkeys, goats, or chickens. Life had disappeared from Jorlo. No home was left intact. Many had burned completely to the ground. There were bullet casings everywhere. Particularly haunting were the remnants of ordinary life left behind, scorched, pillaged, and abandoned. 2 small shoes, seemingly a matching pair for a very young child, hundreds of meters apart on opposite ends of the village. Twisted and blackened bed frames, metal bowls, tin buckets, clay pots, baskets, and cups and plates strewn everywhere, some still whole but dented and covered in soot, others in shards. Crops and food stores had been torched, and what appeared to have been precious water cisterns were smashed to pieces. These ruins were evidence of what was almost certainly yet another attack by Darfur's murderous Janjaweed militia, who were descending upon village after village in the area, killing, raping, and beating hundreds of Chadians, destroying their homes and forcing them to flee. There was no one left to tell us what had happened, no bodies left behind, how many had died and how many still lived. Where had they gone? At that point, it was all a mystery. 2 days later, we came upon the people of Jorlo, around 50 kilometers away. In an open field, they had taken shelter in a small grove of those stunted trees. Scarves, clothing, and sheets of fabric were draped in the branches to shield against the remorseless sun. Here were the donkeys, goats, and chickens. The villagers had fled with little but as much as they could manage, and we were welcomed. We gathered under the only relatively large tree, broad enough to offer shade. First, we heard the harrowing account of the attack on the village only 10 days earlier. The details were horrific, including descriptions of rape and of elderly people and children being burned alive in their huts. 40 people had been killed. Even though they were fearful of further attacks, the villagers had taken time to bury the bodies. I then sat with a group of elders as they provided me with names and details of the 40 men, women, and children who had been killed. Most of them had been shot, often while trying to run for their lives. My notebook filled quickly with their names and ages. We soon reached 39 names. Then we stopped. I asked about the 40th name. There was a great deal of discussion. People reviewed the names in my notes, and I was asked to read them aloud several times. I asked if they were certain that 40 people had died in the attack. They were. I said that it did not matter if we were missing one of the names, but that did not ease their consternation. Time passed, maybe an hour, and then I was notified that the final name had been remembered. But rather than simply being told that name by whoever had recalled it, I was asked to reassemble with the elders back under the tree. Only once we were all seated did someone speak his name, slowly and reverentially. Haroun Yaqub. There was so much in that solemn moment of Haroun Yaqub's name being spoken. It was not the fact that Haroun had been killed that was the point, but rather it was affirming and honoring that he had lived and would long be cherished and remembered for that life, and that his name was being spoken to me and through me to the world, through me to you, because they believed that would lift him up and serve his memory. I have written Haroun Yaqub's name on a piece of paper that I slip into the back of my new annual agenda every January 1st, which is then carried with me everywhere for another year. Over almost 20 years now, it has become creased, faded, and a bit smudged. It has a mysterious water stain along one edge. It is, however, a simple reminder of an essential truth. Believing that every life lived is sacred and matters deeply is the very core of universal human rights. The people of Jorlo taught me that. Small places, close to home.
It actually makes me want to skip to the acknowledgments in the book, and then I want to talk about the big things that are underway right now, and I want to talk about genocide, and I want to talk about this kind of passiveness that we have right now towards some of what's going on. The specificity in your acknowledgments was astonishing to me. I mean, I do this work a lot, and I read a lot of books and sit with people about who are processing and trying to. But the way that you took care to acknowledge the specific things that people, from your parents to your beloved Pat, your wife, to your kids, to your coworkers, does it go back to him?
Oh, it's certainly, I mean, I think it is reflective in that. I think he's in the acknowledgements, even though obviously I never met him and he is no longer with us. I think what mattered to me was there's nothing singular or individual about having written this book, even though, you know, I was the one at my computer and the words came through my fingers. I truly did feel that as I was writing that story, I felt like it was the people of Jorlo who were coming out in other moments. And some of it is very specific, such as a story that is directly aligned with a particular person or people. Others is much more amorphous, people who have just been colleagues, you know, fellow troublemakers, mentors, teachers, who I just know, you know, their influence, their inspiration in my life is in all of those pages. And it was, I probably could have gone on for another 10 pages. I know, you know, the acknowledgement is not supposed to be the length of a whole chapter, but I just really wanted to capture that sense of collectivity, I guess.
It really resonated, especially when you sort of pull out from finishing a book like this and you're thinking about all the influences and then pulling out again and thinking about all the influences that certain people in this world are having right now. Mm-hmm. Benjamin Netanyahu this morning addressing the United Nations General Assembly And he's quoted as saying, Israel must continue to, quote, finish the job in Gaza. How do you reconcile the singularity of that comment and what's been going on in Gaza with the promise of individual action in a human rights setting?
Well, obviously, everything about genocide in Gaza is the cruelest, most disgraceful, inexcusable betrayal of the universal human rights promise. It's worth reminding ourselves that the world actually promised an end to genocide the day before we enshrined the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It even predates the Declaration. That was the first sort of matter of serious human rights business that the United Nations knew in 1948 that it had to grapple with. You know, it was the next day that they got to the rest of the entire picture. We made that promise of never again. So to be watching, and obviously this is not the first time that genocide has once again reared its odious, heinous head since the Holocaust. But here we are again with it playing out in real time. You know, there's this incredibly powerful quote from one of the judges who was part of the South African legal team in the International Court of Justice case that's been brought under the Genocide Convention against Israel, and she said, the Palestinian people are the first people to be live streaming their own genocide in the vain hope that someone cares enough to do something about it. I have not been able to, I mean, there's many words in these last 2 years that I think stay with you. Those words have really lodged, because I think it speaks to the whole world, but it speaks to all of us individually, not just collectively. And to once again, at this point, you know, literally on the, you know, almost on the eve of the 2-year anniversary, a horrific word to use, of October the 7th and everything that has followed since, to still hear that hateful, defiant, genocidal rhetoric from Benjamin Netanyahu. You know, his government and those who defend his government, you know, constantly push back in saying that even though terrible things are happening on the ground in Gaza, that key aspect of the definition of genocide, that you have to be able to demonstrate that there is intent to destroy a people. That's the proof, and we hear it time and time again, and not just from some rogue colonel in the IDF, but from the prime minister, you know, the man who is calling the shots. He's the one who conveys that message and makes it very clear to me, and I think to countless experts around the world. Yet, yes, this is what this is all about. It is genocide.
It struck me that watching the way that people responded to it. People got up and left the room, which is what a lot of us do when we get so tired of the news, we put our phones down and walk away. And other people sort of sat there and witnessed and held that. And other people started to bow up and ask questions and talk amongst themselves and do different. It sort of was the fractured world right there in a microcosm. How do you get some cohesiveness to our inclination to fight, flight, or just sit there wondering what are we to do?
I think, I mean, one thing it is worth reminding ourselves, and maybe this is a little bit of what you kind of see in that description you've just given of the General Assembly Hall, is that I think there's always room and space for different reactions and responses to injustice or genocidal rhetoric such as that, that we all need to know, need to figure out what are we the I am going to deliberately, not in a cowardly sort of way, but I am deliberately going to turn my back and leave right now and convey a message in that, or I am going to be the witness so that I hear what is being said, or I am going to look for some moment, which seems ludicrous to imagine, to see if I can engage constructively, etc. I think we always do have space for all of that, but I think at our level, this goes back again to we the peoples. I think what we need to be doing is finding the openings that give us the chance to link arms and join our collective power. I think we are in a fractured world, and I think even we are fragmented. Even those of us of goodwill and good intention are fragmented. We don't have enough avenues and opportunities that are bringing us together and giving us the ability to forge that cohesive force that is such an agent for change, and that's what we need to be focusing on.
Right. And then there's Donald Trump.
Is there?
There absolutely is. I'm trying to, I'm using names just as a device to kind of get you to open up your, how do we contend with this? This sort of monstrous confronting of truths and twisting of things. Everything that people felt was normal or the norm is being disrupted, whether it's power structures or intergovernmental relations or just basic truths about what's right and what's wrong. How do we begin to, with the goal of creating a universal human rights coalition of the willing, how do we confront somebody who's got so much power and is such a conundrum?
If only I had the magic recipe for.
We have 5 more minutes for this, Alex. We're counting on you.
So there's 3 things that very quickly come to mind that I think that I'm always trying to hold on to myself in how I'm navigating the Trump world. The first is to pick on one of the things you said, that sense of normalization. Don't go there, right? It's easy to because the whole world is shifting over to where he's taken the debate. I was reading something about, was it a day or 2 ago, he was spewing some of his racist, awful, misogynistic hate against 2 U.S. women who are members of Congress, Ilhan Omar and Jasmine Crockett, who are just phenomenal, courageous, outspoken women. And the whole group of folks that were gathered around him were laughing as he was spewing this stuff. And I think it was a piece in The Guardian or somewhere, and it was just, and it was, the journalist was commenting on how normal, like, that's the world we're in now. The whole room was laughing as this man was spewing out this racist hatred. So number 1 is, don't accept that there is anything normal about what is unfolding, and it's so easy to be pulled over to where things are shifting. You know, I think a couple of times in the book I talk about, you know, he's changed the dial, and we've all kind of gone over and decided that's the program we're going to watch as well. Stay grounded in what we know is normal is so important. Be a truth teller. I think at a time when you know, disinformation, I mean, misinformation at its most benign, but disinformation in its most frequent, horrible form is around, and it's often, for ourselves, even those who are well-informed, not easy to figure out where the misinformation and disinformation and good information lies. But seek truth, commit yourself to truth, and then really look for the ways in which you can be that truth teller. Small ways, big ways, whatever. And then third, solidarity. I think especially because Trump's impact falls heaviest on the most vulnerable and marginalized communities in society, right? And determinedly and deliberately and gleefully so. And laughter ensues, right? So I mean, solidarity always matters. Solidarity should be solidarity is the companion, it's the foundation, it's the everything of what Universal is all about. So this is that moment, you know, in the ways that you can, and maybe just mean by, you know, the friends in your circle who you're paying particular attention and reaching out to, but more broadly as well. Look for the ways in which to live your life in real solidarity now. So important.
So important. We'd love to hear from you in the room, and your questions we'll take for the next couple of minutes. We don't have microphones today, so if you can speak your question, and then I'll speak it back so that everybody can have a chance to hear what questions you might have for Alex Neve. Yes, sir. Second row, and then I'll come to you in the first row, and then there's a woman here. Sir. Here. I'll come to you.
Comprehensive treaty process to the legal basis of it, because the modern day treaty has a non-negotiable clause and that is you can't do away with the fact that after you signed the treaty, you no longer are an Indian because the Indian Act in your area has been nullified. Now, this to me seems like an illegal thing because basically they're saying, well, we're dealing with the Indian problem by doing away with Indians. Has there been any legal challenge to this basis of the comprehensive treaty process?
Thank you so much for the question. We were having quite a conversation about this backstage before coming out. Thank you.
So it's a great question. Now, I won't, I'm not an expert on sort of current ongoing litigation in Canada that may give a very specific answer to your question of here's a court case that has been launched by this First Nation and here's its status. What I would say, though, is, because I think this is a profoundly important question, and it's one that has really captured the attention of UN human rights experts and bodies, the very international experts whose role is to monitor and call Canada out with respect to its human rights shortcomings. And they have consistently put pressure on Canada to stop that practice, to this notion of extinguishing rights through some sort of process of legislation or negotiation is a non-starter. The whole thing about rights is you don't get to give them away. You can't be forced to give them away. They can't be stripped from you. Rights are, the Universal Declaration uses the very powerful language of they are inherent, which means we've got them because we were born, and they are inalienable, meaning we never lose them, no matter what. And I think what you're describing is a pernicious example of a way in which the rights of Indigenous peoples in this country are not being treated as inalienable and are being stripped away. And those UN experts have made it very clear that's unacceptable.
Okay. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the answer. Sir.
Thank you. My human rights professor at McGill was none other than John Humphrey. And he emphasized that the opposite of universal was the international that we were contesting already in 1948. When our Prime Minister says that he's not going to use the G word until the International Court or some legal body has said the word definitively, aren't we even channeling universal through the international and sovereignty and the formal legal institutions, which now put us in a straitjacket?
This question came up last night as well. Interesting. So as some of you may have seen, last week sometime our incoming ambassador to the United Nations, David Lametti, when pushed, I think it was in a CBC interview, when pushed, when is the government going to finally acknowledge what, so many experts around the world have been very clear about, and that is that genocide is happening in Gaza. And he said, oh, we don't go there, we wait. We wait. In particular, he hooked his waiting game on the International Court of Justice. When they rule, then we will follow suit. Well, the International Court of Justice, which does have a case in front of them, is probably not going to reach a final pronouncement until well into 2026. And it really kind of dovetails with this approach we often see, I think especially from cowardly governments, who don't want to engage with genocide yes or no while it's happening, and instead want to do so from their armchair, well after the fact, after the final bodies have been thrown on the heap of thousands and thousands of those killed, which totally ignores the fact. Number one, it ignores and denigrates the universality of the promise. And number two, it actually even flies in the face of what their own convention, that convention I referred to earlier, promises. It very remarkably, in its title, makes it clear. It is the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Prevention comes first, and of course it does when we're talking about something like genocide. So we're going to wait another 16, 18 months and completely ignore our obligation to be doing everything we can to prevent genocide right now. The fact that the ICJ hasn't ruled yet changes nothing in terms of our obligations, and they are obligations under international law as a nation, to be doing everything we can to prevent genocide right now.
Thank you. There's a question at the back, and then I'll come to you, sir. Just a question, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess I just wanted your thoughts on dialogue. You were talking about, how we can't really speak to each other in ways that we may be used to. What would be your, I guess, top 3 things to be mindful of if you're wanting to bring together folks that do have different views, and do you see the importance in doing that?
I love the question. So I'm going to give kind of 2 maybe simplistic things and then a more concrete thing. One is we need to have dialogue, right? There's many places in the book where I really push back against the notion that silence is okay, that there's somehow something neutral and benign about silence. I mean, for me, when it comes to human rights violations and injustice, silence has never been an option. But today, when the status quo around which people may choose to be silent is the status quo of climate doom and genocide, we really have to remind people that there's nothing benign in that silence. That silence is acceptance. That silence even starts to become complicity. The second is, so not only do we need to have dialogue, it does need to be dialogue. I know I feel in myself all the time, and I have to pull myself back sometimes in some of my tone in social media. It's so easy to respond in kind. There's been something ugly said, something hateful said, and you just kind of want to shoot back with the same, respond to hate with hate, respond to human rights violations with human rights violations, etc. Where's that take us? Obviously, it only takes us to an increasingly darker space. So I think really challenging ourselves to, one of the things I often say to myself is breathe. Breathe first and then respond. Because silence is not an option, so you've got to respond, but breathe first. In the book, I make, not that I have fleshed this out in any way, but in chapter 5, so you have to get all the way to the end of the book, and I think it's almost one of the last pages of chapter 5, I kind of propose this idea of we need people's human rights assemblies everywhere, sort of gathering places, forums that give us the opportunity across viewpoints, governments and indigenous peoples and local people from the community, et cetera, to come together and have those conversations about human rights, hopefully in constructive, we're not shouting at each other ways. I served, about 2 years ago, I served as commissioner on something called the Ottawa People's Commission on the Convoy Occupation. I see a heads nod. Everyone kind of immediately understands what that is. And one of the things that was really striking to us was that as we were having our hearings, we weren't only hearing, we were overwhelmingly hearing from those who had borne the brunt of the convoy occupation, who lived downtown and had stories to tell of hate and being assaulted and isolation. But we also heard from people living in downtown Ottawa who were all in with the convoy, thought it was the greatest thing going, and were very supportive. And I was really struck by how that worked. Not that we were necessarily getting into a stage of having those different groups speaking to each other and mediating or anything, but that there was the space within which we were having, it was okay to be sharing different and contested views about something, and that it really left everyone, remarkably, I think, even those who were strong convoy supporters, feeling I've been heard, I've had some conversation, this was useful kind of frame of mind at the end. I mean, that's just one small example, but it really left with me a kernel of something and even in our report from the People's Commission, we urge that we need to explore this idea, whatever you may call it and whatever the model would look like in the end, but it's convening spaces where we can have those kinds of conversations and places of dialogue.
Kind of like this?
Yeah.
Having people come together in the middle of a Friday afternoon in Vancouver. Do you have one last question? Is it a tight, small one? Or is it Okay. Okay. Thank you. And then we are out of time.
Thank you. Alex, I like that image of the dial being moved and how even in Canada we see now the increase in committing our country's resources to military, and government departments are being asked to be prepared for an austerity budget, and with this huge increase in military expenditure. So what are your comments about how that will affect not only internationally but even our own human rights here in Canada?
I mean, I'm sure many people in the room have felt completely sandbagged by this notion that somehow we're going to become a 5% military spending country, right? It's taking us into the stratosphere, and there's obviously two dimensions to it. You know, is that truly who we are? Are we truly a militaristic, militarized people and nation? And is that what we want to be projecting into the world? Are those the kind of contributions we want to be making to trying to forge world peace, instead of sort of regrounding ourselves in, you know, a Canadian was one of the drafters of this beautiful document, this amazing promise. We're not instead going to make that our wherewithal. I find that very disconcerting. But the second one is, I think, exactly what you're highlighting, Keith, the notion that this money has to come from somewhere, and where's it going to come from? And we already are hearing it. You know, there's been a suggestion, for instance, that the Ministry of Women and Gender Equality over the next 2 to 3 years, I'm sure some of you heard this number, it's an astounding number to think, is going to have an 80% cut in its budget. Women and gender equality, because we're fine, apparently. It's all good. So we can just kind of scale that back and close up shop, right? And we know that international development will almost certainly, again, be an area of massive cuts. And I find it disgraceful that we're just new normal again, this sense of normalizing, because Donald Trump changed the channel, and that's the conversation we're all supposed to be having now, is more money for the military. And we're not even having a national conversation about it. This could be one of the most consequential shifts in our national identity, our national ethos, and where's the conversation? Let's make the conversation happen.
Yeah. At the very end of the book, at the beginning of the acknowledgements, you write, holding on to hope these days takes work. Thanks for shining a light and giving us things to hope for. Thank you. Thank you very, very much.